Good evening. We're going to get started with this program. On behalf of the Phoenix Holocaust Association, I welcome you to this evening's important and timely program, both in person and virtually via Zoom. Just yesterday, I had the honor of offering the welcome address for the book launch of a local Holocaust survivor who is active in Phoenix Holocaust Association's Speakers Bureau. After speaking in dozens of classrooms over the decades, at the age of 93, she finally documented her story in perpetuity in the pages of her eponymous book. Here in Phoenix, we are fortunate to have survivors who are still able to share their testimonies with thousands of students across Arizona each year. In doing so, they are making an indelible impact on the lives of those honored to be in the room. They are taking part in motivating the next generation to be upstanders who do not stay silent when they see injustices before their eyes. And they are prompting them to look in the mirror and ask, what would I do? What will I do? As of 2021, Holocaust and genocide education is mandated by law in Arizona, requiring that students receive instruction on the Holocaust and other genocides at least twice between 7th and 12th grades. To support this mandate, PHA not only helps to arrange survivors and their descendants for in-person presentations, but we also collaborate with partners like ASU to host statewide educator conferences to provide valuable resources for educators to incorporate study of the Holocaust in their classrooms in fulfillment of the state mandate. We also host community-wide events and commemorations. In a few weeks, Phoenix Holocaust Association will be hosting our annual community-wide Yom HaShoah Holocaust Remembrance Day commemoration. We hope you will all join us the afternoon of Sunday, April 27th at Phoenix Symphony Hall as we remember the victims of the Holocaust and honor the survivors here in our community. The Phoenix Symphony has selected the String Trio by Gideon Klein to be played as attendees enter and during the survivor processional. This haunting work was composed just days before Mr. Klein's transport from Terezin to Auschwitz, where he was murdered. Like the opera, The Emperor of Atlantis, composed by Victor Ullmann and Peter Keen, which we'll hear this evening, our commemoration will shine a light on the crucial role of the arts at Terezin as we continue to marvel today at how this remarkable music could have been written under such horrifying conditions. More details and RSVP information for the Yom HaShoah commemoration can be found on our website, phxha.com. In 1 month's time, I will personally commemorate the 80th anniversary of my Holocaust survivor grandparents' liberation. Cumulatively, my grandmother and grandfather survived 14 concentration and labor camps. I honor their legacy by sharing their stories and wisdom to inspire others to shape a better world by standing up to hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism. I am grateful to this evening's 3 featured speakers whose work brings to light the power of the human spirit in the darkest of times and proves how creativity itself was a form of survival. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Hava Samuelson, Regents Professor of History, Irving and Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism, and Director of Jewish Studies at Arizona State University, who will formally commence this evening's program.
Thank you, Leslie, and thanks everybody who joins us first in person and also everybody who is online with us. So this evening program is part of the Genocide Awareness Week. This is a initiative that is sponsored or supported by the Rosenbluth Family Charitable Foundation. We are very grateful to the foundation for generous support that has funded the first 3 conferences at ASU, conferences of GAW at ASU, and also this one and the next 2 years conferences. So that has really made it possible for us to do what we are doing this week. I want to thank the people here at the JCC, the leaders and the staff people who made this event possible as well. And I made a long list of, if you listen to us in the morning, you know that I thanked a lot of people, a lot of entities. I will not do it tonight, but basically this is a collaborative effort that made it all possible. So our year's This year's focus is on remembrance, memorialization, and repair. And we are, I'm going to take a minute kind of just to tell you why what we are doing in GAW is so special and worth doing. So GAW didn't start at the ASU, it's actually started at the Scottsdale Community College by Professor John Lifferton. When he retired, he asked us at the ASU to take over, and we were very happy to do that. And we did it because we realized that there's something very unique about it. So what is unique about it? Number one, we take a comparative approach. You can call it also a relational approach or a connective approach to genocides which happen all over the world. Each genocide, of course, is distinctive, but when you study them together and you look at the complexity of it, you understand better. You understand why social groups and nations have launched genocidal policies. You understand what genocide teaches about human proclivities. You understand how to overcome the suffering, the loss, and the grief caused by genocides, and how perhaps we might be able to prevent future genocides. So the Holocaust, of course, is a paradigmatic genocide, and no study of genocides can take place without close examination of the Holocaust. Second, the Genocide Awareness Week approaches the phenomenon of genocide in an interdisciplinary manner. We convene scholars who represent very different disciplines, whether it's history, sociology, political science, philosophy and ethics, religious studies, psychology, comparative literature, art history, museum studies, justice studies, gender studies, and of course, Jewish studies. We believe that when you bring together perspectives to shed light on this particular phenomenon, very tragic phenomenon, you understand it better. So that's trying to do here is to go about it in a very collaborative effort. That means that the 3 public institutions here in Arizona, ASU, NAU, and University of Arizona, together with Scottsdale Community College, we band together and we share resources and expertise, and we work well together, not just among ourselves, but also we work together with various civic institutions here in Arizona. For example, the Phoenix Holocaust Association, but also we work with the Armenian community. And if that's not enough, we also have an international dimension to this initiative by working with the Zorian Institute of Canada. They are located in Toronto, and they are committed to Holocaust education and a comparative study of genocides and human rights. So my point is that this is quite unusual. Most, today, people are too busy hating against each other. We are in a society that is highly polarized and full of contestation and feuds. And what we try to show is that by listening to each other and learning from each other and respecting the diversity that we all bring in, diversity of ethnicity, of culture, of religion, but also of opinion. So we are not asking people to think the same way, but to actually bring their knowledge and understanding and to share it with each other, so that we can find ways to honor the memory of victims of violence and injustice. So this evening, we're going to do it in a very unique way by looking at the arts. Art is one of the ways that we can marshal memories of the painful past, but also find ways to heal the wounds. Tonight, we're going to encounter a unique form of art. By this, I refer not only to the opera, Der Kaiser von Atlantis, which was composed at the concentration camp Theresienstadt, but by 2 inmates, that's the composer Victor Ullmann and the librettist Peter Keen. I also refer to the graphic novel that is going to be the focus of this evening, the graphic novel Death Strikes the Emperor of Atlantis. And it was produced by Dave Maass, the author, and Patrick Lay, the illustrator. And it was based, of course, on the opera that we hear more about. So this evening, we're going to talk about 3 arts: music, literature, and drawing. How these art forms work together and how the three artists, Adam Millstein, Dave Maass, and Patrick Leigh, produced this unusual project. That's what this program is about. So let me introduce them very quickly. Adam Millstein is a violinist, a musical educator. Can I say that you're the remarkable leader of the project? Or so Adam Millstein is going to be telling us more about his own work. He's based in Los Angeles, where he is pursuing a doctorate of musical arts at the Colburn School. In the Colburn School, he's the program director of the Ziering Conlon Initiative for Recovered Voices. And that entity promotes the study and performance of music by composers that were suppressed by Nazi policies. Many, of course, lost their life. Mr. Millstein has been involved in several projects of that initiative, and he recorded Irving Schulhoff, Franz Schreker, music by Irving Schulhoff, Franz Schreker, and Mieczysław Weinberg, among other other composers. And we were very lucky to host him here 2 years ago. 2 years ago, he performed for us beautifully at the Mirabella, right? I think it was at Mirabella. And he shared his musical expertise and his brilliant violin performance that you're going to hear tonight. So he did it also a year later in Flagstaff at Northern Arizona University. So he's one person who will be on stage tonight. On the stage, he will be joined by Dave Maass and Patrick Leigh. So Dave Maass is a writer and journalist whose work has been featured in various outlets all familiar to us, such as the New York Times Magazine, Wired Magazine, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Slate, the LA Times, The Atlantic, and other places. He resides or he lives in Reno, Nevada, where he leads the award-winning Atlas of Surveillance project at the Reynolds School of Journalism at the University of Nevada, Reno. And he's there as the Reynolds Scholar in Residence. Patrick Leigh, the illustrator, is an internationally published cartoonist who was trained at Valparaiso University as a BSFA in oil painting, even though these are drawings. And later he was trained in California College of the Arts. He has an MFA in comics. Patrick Leigh is currently an adjunct professor at Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio. And for the past decade, he has published web comics, sci-fi adventures, and multimedia comic experience. So this is the book that they produced together, and it apparently was listed as the top 10 graphic novels of 2024. It was listed by the New York Public Library. So please welcome all three of them here to this incredible program that we are going to learn an awful lot of what happened to the opera in Theresienstadt and how it led to this particular graphic novel. Please.
Maybe. Okay, I'm Adam Millstein, and thank you so much, Hava, for the introduction. And also, it's just been so lovely to be able to collaborate with you over the past few years, and just such a pleasure. My second time here in Arizona, and it's actually third time in Arizona. I just love it, and thank you all for being here in person and also on Zoom, of course. So we have a lot to cover today, and I hope that you will find it interesting. And just to clarify, I'm getting my doctorate at UCLA. Colbert doesn't offer a doctorate. Maybe one day, but just that's for my UCLA people if they're watching. I want to make sure I shut that up properly. No problem, but I do work at Colburn. Anyway, so we're going to talk today about Death Strikes, this wonderful work that was written in Theresienstadt. And I wanted to just start off very quickly talking a little bit more about the Ziering Conlon Initiative for Recovered Voices, which is at the Colburn School that I'm the program director of. It was founded by a man named Bob Elias, who Hava and I know very well, who had actually connected all three of us to turn this graphic novel into an operatic stage production in the Louisville Orchestra ultimately. And it was founded by Bob and also a gentleman named Maestro James Conlon, who is the artistic director of the Los Angeles Opera and the artistic director of the Recovered Voices Initiative. And as Hava mentioned, the purpose is to promote and perform music by composers that were suppressed by the Nazis and their collaborators from 1933 to 1945. The Nazis were incredibly thorough in their destruction of the artistic and cultural milieus that existed in Europe prior to the war. There was effectively 2 generations of classical composers that were quite literally ripped out of history books. And it is my goal and the goal of the Syrian Conlin Initiative to bring this music back into the canon of Western art music in the best way that we can. And one of the ways in which that can happen is to actually have people performing the music, first of all, audiences to listen to the music, and for musicians themselves to get their hands on this music. A lot of the music exists and is out there, but it's been neglected. In classical music, if any of you here are classical fans, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but we have a tendency in the classical world to kind of see a name that we don't know and then kind of turn away from it and be like, oh, we don't know their name, they must not be very good. That's the case in some instances, whereas in the case of these composers, they were very seminal in constructing really important works of the 20th century. And the only reason why we don't know their names has nothing to do with their artistic merit, but rather the racial, political, genocidal, and social policies of the Nazis, which either resulted directly in their murder, their suppression, or their exile. Many of these composers actually ended up in Los Angeles, where I'm from. It got coined the Weimar of the Pacific. That's a whole other fascinating topic that I will not be getting into today, but if you have questions, please come up afterwards and we'll talk about it. So that's just a little bit just to talk and sort of frame what we're getting into today. And in terms of classical music, there's been a lot to restore other arts that were suppressed by the Nazis, like visual art, things like that. I don't want to say it's easier, but it is easier. You can find lost artwork, you can put up a gallery, you can advertise it, you get people come to the gallery, check out the artwork, leave. Classical music is a whole different ballgame that involves not even just marketing, but in order to make something part of the so-called canon again, you need teachers, you need students, you need performers, you need audience members, you need a whole group of people to make a music really come alive and to be champions of it. And the Nazis really destroyed this whole ecosystem that was thriving all over Europe prior to the war. So today we're going to be talking about one of these pieces, and I'm going to refer to these composers as recovered voices. Composers is an umbrella term. And it's interesting, the bulk of these composers actually didn't necessarily write within concentration camps. Today is a major exception to that. There are many that perished even before the Nazis came into power, but they were suppressed nonetheless. There's an example of a composer named Franz Schrecker, for example, who was at the height of popularity. He was one of the top educators in the German-speaking world. He died of a stroke before the war began when the Nazis demoted him from his high position at the Berlin Hochschule because he was Jewish, and his wife fled, and when she ended up returning back to Europe, every trace of his music was destroyed. His name was ripped out of history books, but the printing plates remained, so they were able to actually bring his music back. That's an example of a composer that falls under the recovered voices umbrella, that didn't die in the war, didn't write during or within a concentration camp rather, but was still repressed and suppressed nonetheless. But today we're going to talk about some of these composers that wrote very infamously and famously, if you will, actually, in Terezin, which was a fortress town originally built in the 1780s in German called Theresienstadt. It was named after Maria Theresa, the mother of the emperor who built it at the time. And as you can see, it's this fortress that was eventually, the Nazis had the whole small Czech population there forced out in 1940. Prior to World War II, it was often used as a high security prison. Very notably, one of the prisoners was the man whose name I'm blanking on right now, who assassinated Franz Ferdinand in maybe not intentionally, caused World War I. He was actually a prisoner there back in the teens. Trivia, not very fun trivia, but trivia nonetheless. But during the war, when it was occupied by the Nazis, there were about 25,000 to 30,000 Jews that were housed in a place that should only have housed, I think it was about 6,000 max or something like that. So grossly overpopulated. In total, 141,000 Jews were interned there. Among them, there was German, Austrian, Czech, Dutch, and Danish Jews. 33,000 died there. There was horrific conditions. It was so overpopulated, no access to proper hygiene, etc. And additionally, there was forms of terrible execution for absolutely no good reason. And 88,000 were sent east to Auschwitz or other camps. and about 13% survived the war. There's a very infamous propaganda documentary that was actually created by the Nazis called Theresienstadt, a documentary film from the Jewish settlement area. And this was created as a ruse to fool the Red Cross to show how well the Jews were actually being treated in this lovely camp of theirs. They sent many of the already sick or dying quickly out before this was shot. They repainted some areas and they had different propaganda images to show how good camp life was. This video can still be watched on YouTube. Very fascinating to check out and just sort of see this twisted way in which the camp was utilized by the Nazis. That being said, there was, interestingly, a lot of arts and culture that did happen within this camp. The Nazis in all of their occupied areas started banning music immediately when they came into power. So effectively, there came a point in time, like around 1941, 1942, where Terezin was one of the only places where Jews could actually openly be making music, creating art, and performing together. They didn't have to do so in private or in secrecy anymore. And the Nazis sort of had this attitude that at a certain point around 1942 or so, like, well, they're going to be dead anyway. We're going to send them east, let them have their fun while it lasts, essentially. And it was during this time that there was actually a great sort of boom of creation of different types of music. Victor Ullmann, who composed the opera that you're going to hear in a little bit, interestingly enough, he wasn't really interested in his own Jewish heritage that much and Jewish musical heritage prior to his arrival at Theresienstadt. And when he went there, he actually got more in touch with his own Jewish roots and wrote things based off of more Jewish themes. But it was not until he went to the concentration camp that happened. And he also was a very active critic, and they hosted different forms of chamber music, which is like smaller groups of people performing. They found a really old, poorly made, constructed piano where vocal recitals were given. They staged a variety of operas, including even Rigoletto. They performed Mozart. There was Smetana that was performed. There was a very vibrant arts culture, which was really something that was essential to the suffering and to counteract that suffering that was going on. So not only were they performing works of great masters of Western art music, they were also composing and creating music. And you'll hear a little bit more about the illustrating and the visual arts that were going on in the camp as well. I wanted to call to mind one example of a composer who I'm going to perform for you in a second. And her name was Ilse Weber. She was alive from 1903 to 1944. And she was a Czech Jewish poet. She very famously worked with children. Even prior to the war, she was writing sort of fairy tales and children's stories and folk songs and folk kind of music. But while she was in Terezin, she was there with one of her sons. Her mother came with her, and then her mother was immediately sent to Srebrenica and murdered when she arrived. And Ilse was very just unbelievably brave, and she created a series of gorgeous lullabies, one of which I'll play for you in a second. And she worked with a lot of the children in the infirmary in Theresienstadt, and she decided to voluntarily be deported to Auschwitz because she refused to abandon the sick children that were being put on transports. So she was sent there with one of her sons, and they were both immediately gassed upon arrival. Her husband survived, and one of her other sons survived the war, but unfortunately Ilse did not. So I'm going to perform for you a lullaby that she wrote in about 1942 to 43. And she wrote this really as a way to comfort many of the sick children that were imprisoned there. And the words, this is a rough translation from German, but essentially, Betty bye, the wind plays on the lyre. He's playing sweetly in the reeds. The nightingale sings in the meads. Betty bye, byre, the wind plays on the lyre. Betty bye, the moon, she is a lantern. She looks from heaven's tent up high, a twinkle in her tired eye. Betty bye's, plantern, the moon, she is a lantern. Betty bye, the world in stillness lying. No sound disturbs your peace and rest, my baby. Huddle in your nest. Betty bye's, lying, the world in stillness lying. And there's a photo of Ilse Weber and her mother. And I just wanted to play this piece of hers, Vigala, for you on my violin. I'm gonna move this microphone. technical difficulties. Give me 1 second. This is a pedal to change my music. I'm not using my hands. There it is. Now I'll pass it off to these gentlemen.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Dave Maass, the writer of Death Strikes. You want to introduce yourself real quickly?
Absolutely. Hello, my name is Patrick Way. I'm the illustrator of Death Strikes.
So we're going to be taking you behind the scenes of how we created this graphic novel. We're going to take you through sort of our inspiration, the rules we set for ourselves, as well as how we designed the characters and how we built the world, this sort of science fiction fantasy world that our story takes place in. But first, we have to introduce you to two characters, Peter Keen and Victor Ullman. Now, Peter Keen on the left was in his early 20s when he was sent to Terezin. He was this whirlwind of creativity. He wrote poetry. He wrote plays. He made puppets. He did painting and illustration and technical drawings. He was just there living his full life. Prior to being sent to Terezin, he was an art student. He was ejected from art school for being Jewish, but he did not relent when it came to creating art when he was in Terezin. On the right, we had Victor Ullmann, who was in, the prime of his life, in his 40s. He had been, on the brink of becoming this, incredible figure in classical music when he was also, sent to Terezin. He'd owned a music store. He'd been a professor. He'd studied under Schoenberg. And I want you to notice that they both have the same birth date. That is something that was very interesting about them. They also have the same recorded death date because they were sent to Auschwitz at the same time. Now, Victor Ullmann died on entry. The belief is that Peter Keen actually did live a little bit longer and then died of tuberculosis. But nevertheless, both of these two individuals were just super uncompromising in their commitment to the arts. As Adam mentioned, Victor Ullmann did criticism of art, and he actually continued writing criticism of other performers while he was in Terezin. And he didn't give them a single inch of slack. Just because you're in a concentration camp and you've got barely any instruments and barely any paper and you're underfed and you're under constant fear of death, that does not mean that you cannot perform your best. That was how he felt about it. And he even had this line, and I'm going to bring it up, that is really inspiring of how he felt about the arts in Terezin. And I have to bring it up here real second. So he said, "By no means did we sit weeping on the banks of the waters of Babylon. Our endeavor with respect to the arts was commensurate with our will to live." Now, what's actually pretty amazing is the fact that these two were even able to collaborate on anything because they were so just immovable in their commitment to their artistic vision. And maybe that's why they came up with this very controversial, very daring, very darkly comedic, and almost like a little bit scandalous within a concentration camp, this opera called Der Kaiser von Atlantis. There are various other subtitles for it, and there's actually seemed to be some debate among both the librettist, Peter Keen, and the composer, Victor Ullmann, about what it should be called. The final version that appears on the score, which I'll show you in a moment, is called Der Kaiser von Atlantis, but Peter Keen's version says Der Tod dankt ab, or Death Abdicates. Most of you probably haven't read it already, so I'll go over the plot so you can follow along with us. So this opera is a 4-scene opera, not a 4-act opera, 4 scenes of 1 act. And it's set in this alternative universe where Atlantis never sank. It never became this trident ocean, Poseidon kind of place. It never sank. It became this totalitarian nation ruled by a math-obsessed, warmongering dictator named Emperor Overall. Now, when Overall declares all-out war, everyone against everyone, every man, woman, child, handicapped people, school children, everybody has to fight against each other until the end. Death is like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm exhausted already. He breaks his sword and refuses to work. Now, this leaves a new world of the living dead, and in this world, a soldier and a young rebel find that fighting is futile and instead rediscover love. That is the sort of story of this book. Now, in us doing the graphic novel, we wanted to go back to the original source material. The version that you can see performed from time to time, it has a lot of modern additions to it, and we wanted to go back to the original. And what we found in this international adventure that we went on to try to find the original documentation is that there is no final finished version of it. We have several different documents to work off, each of which seems a little bit incomplete, and all of which contradict each other. So here is the original and surviving version of the score of the opera. This is written in Victor Ullmann's handwriting. The paper quality changes over time. At some point, he ran out of pre-lined paper and had to start lining it himself. This one is sitting in the musicology archive in Basel, Switzerland, called the Paul-Sacher Stiftung. Now, we also have 2 other versions to work off of. This one on the left is the handwritten libretto by Peter Keen, which is in the Wiener Holocaust Library in London. The middle here is a typed version of the libretto, also at the Paul-Sacher Stiftung. But this one is very interesting in that it is extremely dulled down. It is not controversial at all. They've removed a lot of elements. Anything that could be seen to be a satire on Hitler or criticizing the Third Reich has been removed. It's not even called the Emperor of Atlantis because that's apparently too close to, the Führer. So it's called the King of Atlantis, the König of der Atlantis. But we believe this is the one that may have gone through the camp censors, because the way it was set up, things had to go through a Jewish council where they approved things before they could be performed, because the Nazis are outsourcing censorship within the community. And we believe that that possibly represents what this middle version is. But interestingly, this middle version is actually written on the back of what you see on the right. These are the transfer forms. These are the registration forms for a series of women who were of sort of senior citizen women who were held in the camp at the time. So they even had to to create this art, they even had to recycle paper that were used for these horrific practices by the Nazis. Now, probably one of the most interesting pieces of documents that we came across in this process is in a private collection of a man named Peter Barber, and he's in England, and I believe his aunt or great aunt was the girlfriend of Peter Kane. And Peter Kane had drew a cartoon to send to his girlfriend complaining about the opera, complaining how his libretto was treated. And so we have 6 panels, and the first one, it's called Der Tod dankt ab, the libretto. And you've got this picture of Death, the Grim Reaper, as this imposing, figure with a cloak and a tall hat and a skull face. In the second one, you have the composer come in, starts trimming the skirt turn it into a skirt a little bit. Then I think you have the director coming in, and he's trimming it a little bit more. The censor come in, just yanks off the bottom altogether, knocks off the hat. Then finally, these stage hands come in. They've got a can of pink paint, and then suddenly by the end, Death has gone from the imposing specter of before to what seems to be a dancing ballerina. Maybe we're not really sure what the intent was. But for us, this was it told us a few things. That one, that the version that we see at the end, the version that's performed, is not necessarily the full artistic vision that went into this in the beginning. But also it's a grounding thing for us because we have to imagine, what is the 7th panel here with our graphic novel? Is the dancer even more ridiculous, or are we able to come back to this more skeletal, angry Death figure? And I think that's what we decided to aim with in the end. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my origin story on this. We shot this about an hour and a half ago, maybe 2 hours ago. So I first learned about Der Kaiser von Atlantis on a trip to the Best Buy in Paradise Valley, which I think is 4 miles from here. It no longer exists. It became the Best Buy outlet, and now it's no more, as is Paradise Valley Mall. But in the late 90s, I was kind of a teenager into punk rock, and I think my parents, who are here today, took me to Best Buy. They were buying something that day, and I was wandering around the CD section. Somehow I found myself in the classical section, and I see this video, and it's like a VHS tape and a CD for this series called The Music Survives, Degenerate Music, Music Suppressed by the Nazis. And I'm like, what is more punk rock than music being suppressed by the Nazis? Yeah. And I'd never been into any kind of classical music before, but I took this home and I became obsessed with it. There was all sorts of these recovered voices on this collection. And one of these pieces in particular was a section from Der Kaiser von Atlantis, and I immediately went and got the full opera and just decided that this is something that really needed a bigger audience. Because in the end, you have this opera audience in large is not very big. The fans of modern opera is not very big. The fans of German opera, German language opera, is not very big. And then suppressed Jewish opera from a concentration camp in German from the 20th century has very little audience at all. And the story itself, the backstory is incredible, but the story of this science fiction, fantasy, zombies, alternative universe opera was just so amazing that I felt like this had to be a different medium, and I felt like a graphic novel would be the way to go. And it took me a very long time to get there, almost 20 years. But Patrick and I went back there today to take this full circle. And so I am very happy to be here today in my hometown, presenting to you. So our goal with this graphic novel is that we did not, first of all, our goal was not to create an illustrated libretto. We didn't want to just take the words of the opera and throw pictures on it. We believe that this should function as a standalone and compelling graphic novel. But if you're somebody like Adam, who is just intimately familiar with this opera, we wanted it to be immediately recognizable to you. That meant keeping the characters the same, the structure the same, the message the same, but just making it work in a different medium. So we did have to make changes for this to become a graphic novel. Like it doesn't just immediately, you just can't just wedge it into it. You have to change it. You have to expand upon it. You have to alter it. So the first thing we realized that we were going to have to change is that there are some references that would not make sense to a contemporary audience. You may not be surprising to know that German poetry from the 1940s doesn't always have like straight translations into modern colloquialism. So to give you an example, there is a line where this character representing life is just bemoaning how the world is all messed up in this time of war, and he says, Das Wort die, I don't know how to say this. Adam, do you know how to say this? All right. The world is kunterbunt. The world is kunterbunt. That is the word, kunterbunt, which does not translate very well. I asked many speakers, consulted many dictionaries, kunterbunt. And what we landed on is that kunterbunt is best described as this pattern that you see on a gesture. Now, you may have seen this pattern before and not known what this pattern was, but kunterbunt is probably it. In other English translations, they use the term topsy-turvy. The world is topsy-turvy. That feels really dated to me as well. So we scratched our heads and we thought, well, in 2020, which is when we were writing the script for this, what is kunterbunt? And we came up with the world is a dumpster fire. That was the term everyone was using in 2020. The world is a dumpster fire. There was also a line about the world is kunterbunt, and we're on a Ringelspiel, which was like a carousel or a merry-go-round. We're on a merry-go-round. So what you can see here is we actually took that kunterbunt pattern, and we had our character of life falling into a dumpster fire that is on a carousel. So we're able to honor the original poetry of it through this more engaging art. So two other things. We wanted to fix some plot holes and inconsistencies, and we wanted to make sure all the characters had a narrative arc. And these are actually intertwined, and let me show you why. So in the original opera, in the opera that's performed, in the original opera, there is a character in the third sort of scene who's introduced who is a soldier. And you get very emotionally attached to the soldier, and then he just disappears. He's just gone for the rest of the performance. And we were like, why is that? Why does that happen? And the reason is when we got a hold of the handwritten libretto and it had the cast of singers, the character playing the soldier and the character playing life in this cave named Perot was the same singer. They did not have enough singers to perform the original vision. So what they had to do is write out this soldier and have the same singer perform both roles. And so we felt like, well, we can solve that in our book. We don't have that limitation. So let's give that soldier the ending that he deserves in our graphic novel. And then finally, that soldier actually in the original graphic novel, the love sort of dynamic is a little dated. There's a weird power dynamic. The character is very old. The girl is very young. We didn't feel like that would read very well, and so we wanted to change that as well. And you'll see what we did in just a moment here. We did set up some ground rules for ourselves because we were going to be adding a lot. And we realized that we had to be both respectful, but we also had to take a cue from Peter Keen and Victor Ullmann and be uncompromising. We just had to be, we can't be afraid of anything. We have to be respectful, but there has to be we have to lean into it. And so the first rule was that if we were going to add, in designing the world and we were going to be adding things, we wanted to be inspired by the architecture and the artifacts of the town of Terezin itself where they were imprisoned. We also had an incredible amount of artwork by Peter Keen that survived, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of illustrations, some from Terezin, some from when he was a kid. And we wanted to pull from that into our graphic novel, not just as artwork, but as poetry. We wanted to reference other elements of artistic defiance of the Nazis. If we were going to be designing a character, who other characters from history can we pull from? We wanted to make sure that we alluded to contemporary authoritarianism, oppression, and censorship. We wanted to see if it's not a musical medium, but we wanted to see if we can make musical references throughout. But the story of the opera itself is so full of dark humor and puns and wordplay that if we were going to be adding new dialogue, it had to have puns and wordplay in it as well. And it also had to play with this idea of dualities and things being flipped on its head, because life and death kind of switch roles in this opera, and we wanted to make sure we went with that as well. But probably the most important thing is that we didn't want people to look at this book and say, this is a book about the Holocaust. It is not a book about the Holocaust. It is not an opera about the Holocaust. The guys who were writing this were experiencing the Holocaust, but they didn't have any idea of the full breadth of what's going on. People learned about that years afterwards. So what we have here is a message from people in the Holocaust who wrote this as something that reflects on what was going on in World War I, in World War II, is going on, and that should resonate today. And our hope that is, if you open up this book now, if you open it up 5 years from now, you'll be able to find some sort of lesson, and you won't just be thinking about the Holocaust. You'll be thinking about how it affects the times of today. So I'm going to take you through the characters next, and I promise you'll hear from Patrick. We have a whole section for Patrick in a bit. The characters, there are only 6 in the graphic novel and in the opera itself. These characters were designed by an artist named Ezra Rose. They are just incredible illustrator who works on sort of anti-fascist elements, but also Kabbalah and other kinds of Jewish mysticism. I found their work online and was immediately entranced by it. And I'm like, you are going to be the character designer for this book. And they were totally down for it. But we needed to find another artist who could actually help us put it together, and that's Patrick. But I just want to make sure I give credit to Ezra about the sort of origin of these characters. So it helps to explain scene by scene so you can see how this comes together. So in the first scene, you have death and you have life. And they are sitting in this netherworld arguing about who has it worse in a time of endless war. Then this character called the drummer, who is, in the opera represents kind of like, newspapers and radio and mass media, comes in and announces this whole new edict about everybody having to kill each other, and then Death gets mad and breaks his sword. So with Death, we really lucked out. We knew what Death should look like. And so Ezra took Death, invented this coat, gave the hat, which is called the shako, but I wanted to make sure that Death's face was just unemotional. It was just a skull. But to add that emotion, to have Death emote, Ezra invented this cloud of smoke from the bottom that would illustrate his emotions and feelings throughout the piece. It also helps because it's very difficult to draw bony feet, right? Drawing bony feet over and over and over again is a huge task, and that allows us to escape around that. And then the final version over here, you can see Patrick. This is the first image I had in my mind to represent this book. This is what I thought should go on a T-shirt, and Patrick nailed it. Now, I'm bringing up this image again because in the version, if you ever see this performed, the character of life is dressed as the Harlequin opera archetype. And that's how it appears in the score as well. However, when we were going through Peter Keen's version of it, he kept referring to it as the Perrault archetype. Now, Perrault is the clown who cries through their tears. And that was one of the big changes we wanted to make from what you might see on the stage, is that we felt that Perrault better encapsulated the character, but was also truer to the original. In part because, as I said, we had hundreds of pieces of art from Peter Keen to go with, and we went through all of his art, and I never found a single drawing of Harlequin. I found lots of drawings of Perrault. So here's like when he was an art student, he did his own version of a Vogue magazine cover with the Perrault archetype. So I went to Ezra and I said, Ezra, I want to evoke some music here. And I gave Ezra this picture of David Bowie. So this is from the photo shoot for the Scary Monsters album, which he's, resplendent and has a hat and he's glowing. But there was a series of photographs shot behind the scenes where he's just haggard and dirty and smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, that's where life needs to be. Life is exhausted and doesn't want to be life anymore. So I gave this to Ezra, and Ezra added their own elements to it. So Ezra went and found, brought in this character, Cloud Calhoun. Now, Cloud Calhoun was what we might refer to as a queer, non-binary artist from France during World War II, who became a resistance fighter and a resistance anti-propagandist, had created their own art to undermine the Nazis and narrowly escaped death. And so you'll see elements in this character design of Cloud Calhoun as well. And then Ezra went and looked at this other sort of musical figure, Klaus Nomi, again, a queer figure who brought sort of synth and other kind of like elements into the opera scene and cabaret and has their own sort of cult following. And all of that comes together for what you see on the left, the version of Pierrot and life that Ezra came up with. Now, I've grabbed this image from the book very specifically because I want to take this one more level for you. So there is a scene, or in the opera itself, I didn't make this up, but in the opera itself, life is doing this big aria about how they're just, life sucks, I don't want to live anymore, why bother anymore? And it ends with like, you can blow me wherever the four winds blow. And I'm like, that's the end of Bohemian Rhapsody. That is the exact sentiment at the end of Bohemian Rhapsody. It's the same words of it. Let's go with that. And so I'd given Patrick this image of Freddie Mercury doing it, that pose at the end of the video for it. But that image itself is a direct reference to Marlene Dietrich, who famously worked with the OSS, the predecessors to the CIA, to use her own artwork and fame and music to undermine the Nazis. So we were able to have two sort of levels of music going into this. Now, the drummer character, as I mentioned, is described in the opera as being this kind of like, it's unsure if this is a real figure, or an archetypal figure, a metaphorical figure, but this is the spokesperson for Emperor Overall, who gives all the edicts out to the public. We ended up going with a holographic figure, a way to project this all over the place. This is what would be called in opera world a trouser role. That this is somebody who's like a kind of a male role, but played by a woman, but there's some kind of like gender play in there. This was the most challenging for our artist, Ezra, to draw. So as somebody who identifies as an anti-fascist artist, having to do this character was difficult. And the way they described it is they assigned themselves the task of Hitler Youth, but a sexy Halloween costume. And I think they got it right on that one, to have this character who does have to have some sort of sex appeal to try to lure men to war. So in the second scene, Emperor Overall, the second scene focuses on Emperor Overall. He's in his tower in a cell. He doesn't even see anybody else. He has a mirror in his cell, but he puts a cover over it so he doesn't have to even see himself. And he issues his kill orders through conversations with this device called the loudspeaker. And all the other characters in the world are just talking to him through this loudspeaker. When he learns that no one is dying and death is defying him, he becomes enraged. And Patrick, if you could take over and describe Overall for a second.
Sure, absolutely. This is Emperor Overall on the, you're looking at this left. That is the image that I got from Ezra, right? And there's some very clear references here. Specifically, I see Kaiser Wilhelm. Victor Ullmann served in World War I. When we talk about this being a piece of art from the Holocaust rather than about the Holocaust, you can really see Ullmann's voice in the criticism of this figure. And the way that this figure becomes so contemporary every time you open it up. In the time that we have been working on it, this has reminded us of no less than six different figures, contemporary figures, because it's such an incisive critique of power at this stage. So I keyed off of that both because Kaiser Wilhelm was a very ostentatious person in and of himself. He had a chair that was fashioned to be a saddle so that he could always feel like he was astride a horse. He had a wild mustache, absolutely bananas. And a lot of those things kind of follow over into the way that I drew Overall. See, this building doesn't like Overall either. And one of the things that you may note, when you draw a character that somebody else handed you, eventually you have to figure out how your hand does it, right? So Overall kept getting a little bit fleshier and a little bit older every single time. I think I took it to the extremes here. It's a little bit too Marlon Brando. We've kind of pulled back from that. But this is a character who's wildly powerful and wildly disconnected. He has welded himself into the top of a tower, and every day he gets up and puts on a military uniform with epaulets that are wider than his shoulders actually are because he wants to look broad. He wears gloves and a little cape. His room, actually, if you get some time to spend with the book, is absolutely insane. For a room that you've welded yourself into, you would think you'd bring all the comforts of home, but I wanted to depict overall as an absolute fool. So he's got a cot that he sleeps on. He brought an uncomfortable wooden chair. His chalkboard where he does calculations is both too high up and too low down and too wide to be efficiently used. Again, kind of reaching for all of these critiques of what it is to be in power in such a way that you are unassailable, right? And the way that you separate yourself out from humanity entirely, including this mirror that he's covered up so that he can't even see his own reflection. So there's not a single human voice in his ear but his own. The only person he speaks to is the loudspeaker, which actually is the next slide.
Oh, I'm going to jump back for just 1 second, just to make one note from Ezra. In asking Ezra about this design, and specifically the hair, Ezra said, it is an homage to bad fascist hair choices, which they seem to have noticed over time. We didn't initially have anything to go off of what the loudspeaker should look like. So I was reading about this thing called the Volksempfänger, which is this radio that Goebbels developed to place in the homes of Germans to be a way for them to receive propaganda. And I handed an image of this to Ezra, who turned it into this retro-futuristic device with kind of epaulets of its own. And this is both serves as the narrator throughout our book, as well as this voice of all these other people when speaking to Emperor Overall. Very late in the process, we actually got a hold of this image. Somebody from the National Museum of Prague sent this to us, and this is the actual original sketch of what the production would have looked like, or the stage design would have looked like in Terezin. And we believe this object in the middle here is their version of the loudspeaker. So what we did, because it was so late in the process and we couldn't redesign everything, is that Patrick, in drawing this flashback for Emperor Overall, when he's imagining what it was like to be a kid, we were actually able to stick that right in the background to give homage to the original idea. In the third scene, there's an older soldier wandering through the wasteland of the undead, and he finds himself in the crosshairs of a young rebel. They fight, but it proves futile because no one can die, and in the absence of violence, they begin to talk and realize there is another way, through love. Now, this is the design for the soldier. When I went to Ezra, I said, I want the soldier to not just be a soldier, but to be an army medic, because I felt like there's this great irony of having an army medic, somebody who works for a killing force whose job is to do the opposite, to save people's lives. And then it gets even more ironic at a time when no one can die because there's nothing for them to do anymore. So we had this soldier, but this soldier is not, we had to design him off something. And we ended up deciding to pick another figure from history named Magnus Hirschfeld. This was a Jewish doctor. He was a Jewish doctor in the first half of the 20th century who really pioneered a lot of what we would call LGBTQ medicine today. He did the first gender reassignment surgery. He had a huge library of academic work and scientific work and literature about the queer community. He actually coined the term transvestite, which is not used anymore, but it was like the first word for transgender people. And he also was oppressed by the Nazis and had his facilities destroyed and had to, flee. And so we ended up basing it off him, also because his mustache is quite good for cartooning. We have some visual jokes around his mustache. Now, he also had a companion who traveled with him, who he met in China, named Li Chuzong. And so you'll also see Li Shu in the background in some of the flashbacks as well. Now, we had the worker, this character that was supposed to be like a farm girl, but we decided to make her a worker. And you'll find her in here. The only thing we had to go off in designing this character is that there's a line in the opera about this character wearing bullets like jewelry. And I wanted this character also to have this backstory, because there's no backstory for these. These are very like surface level characters in the opera. I wanted this character to have a backstory of being somebody who was a forced munition worker who had aspirations to be a poet. And so Ezra took these British munition worker outfits, created jewelry out of bullet casings, and that's how we ended up with our character, the worker. Patrick, real quickly, because we're going to be short on time. Let's hear about this gun.
Yeah, absolutely. So our worker has to have a gun. And Dave came across this fantastic photo of Faye Schulman in her leopard's print coat firing away and said, hey, can we use this gun? Can you figure out what this is? I have a friend who's a curator who's very familiar with firearms, and I sent it to him. 5 minutes. He was like, yes, that is a PPSH-41. It is a Russian manufacturer where there were tons of ammo. And so it was very, very popular in this arena. This happens to have a drum magazine instead of a banana clip, which you might be more familiar with seeing at this time. So it looks a little bit like a Tommy gun. You would never use this as a sniper rifle, which is what our character does. That just absolutely plagued me. I was constantly worried that somebody was going to come at us for the misuse of this weapon. But it was just another way to connect to actual history, actual artifacts, without it really calling attention to itself, right? It's just a way to embed it in the story so that it's inescapable. Yeah.
Sorry, just a moment. So Faye Schulman was a Jewish photojournalist who became a partisan fighter. And her, in her autobiography, she talks about her favorite two objects being her camera and her gun. But I would also just want to give a little bit of credit to her glamorous partisan outfit of leopard skin. It's quite amazing. In the final scene, the soldier and worker lead an uprising, culminating in death confronting the emperor. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I don't want to spoil it for you, but just to give you an idea how I wanted everybody to have a character arc. In the opera, part of it talks about how death should be transforming into this Greek god channeling people, that channels people to the afterlife. I don't think I've seen a production where they actually make that happen. And I think that might have been what Peter Keen was upset about in it. But we did want to make an homage to it. So there's a scene where death is crossing into a mirror, and you can see the reflection of Hermes and his foot going across. Similarly, the drummer just sort of disappears at the end, but I wanted to give the drummer a story arc too. So after Emperor Overall is overthrown, we have this propaganda mass media transform into independent journalism, and we've modeled this character after Dorothy Thompson, the American journalist in Europe, who was one of the few to call out Hitler for what he was and get expelled from the country for it. I mentioned the art of Peter Keen and bring that into our book. We have all these photographs that Peter Keen shot. And one of the opera has this line where Life is talking about how photos are what humans use to remind themselves what it's like to smile. So you can see we took this photo that Peter Keen had shot of his friends in front of a bar called, I believe, Conrad V. And we were able to bring that in as a photograph that goes with that line from the opera. Peter Keen also drew a lot in the camp, and there actually was, for at least a while in Terezin, a working operating room that he illustrated, and that becomes a recurring sort of background scene throughout the book as well. He was a technical illustrator. That was his job on campus. He drew all sorts of technical posters on how things work and how things should work. And there's one scene where Life is describing in comedically overcomplicated ways about why they've decided to stop changing their clothes. It has to do with the calendar and running, all sorts of. I'll let you enjoy it in the book. But we decided to get across that overcomplicated explanation by drawing the design elements from some of Peter Keen's technical illustrations. So you can see the numbers and the lettering carrying over between the two. Here's another technical illustration that he drew that we used to sort of show the population of Terezin by taking his illustration and putting those same characters into our book. Now, you're not going to be able to read the text here, but I just sort of want to show it to you that there's this extended scene it's shorter in the opera, but in our book it's a little bit long, where there's a confrontation and a fight scene. And it really needed some voiceover, but we didn't have any other dialogue to draw from or any text. So what we did is we went back and found this poem called The Plague City that Peter Keen had written. And he'd actually written it for music for Gideon Klein, which we talked about earlier. But Gideon Klein's music disappeared. We don't have that, but we do have the poem. And so we brought in elements of that poem to fill out this scene and to give it more depth. So I told you I wanted to have this character become a poet. There is this surviving, very dark love poem that he'd written. And we were able to pull that in as well to help that give our character that additional backstory. And then the final thing I want to talk about that we pulled from Peter Keen is that There seems to be what you might call a prequel that exists for Der Kaiser von Atlantis. When Peter Keen was a teenager, he wrote a satirical story called The War with ABCD, in which he imagines the letters of the alphabet fighting amongst each other. And we pulled several elements from that into the book. In giving Kemper overall his origin story, we had him as a kid imagining a war between letters and numbers, and that's how he decided to become so obsessed with math. And I'm going to hand this part over to Patrick.
So when we got started, we knew that this was a fantasy story, that this had been written to the limitations of these folks, right? Scene 1 is just a bench in a black stage. We saw the drawing for plans for scene 2, fabric with a desk. So we knew that we had the opportunity in drawings to set it anywhere we wanted to, right? There's no budget for us. We can go anywhere we want to go. And we spent a while talking about what that would look like. And initially I had thought it was going to be a totally science fiction steampunk world with lots of like pipes and tubes. But once we actually got to Prague and Terezin for our research trip, and you guys saw the striking way that Terezin looks, immediately it was clear, no, this is where it takes place, right? So all throughout the book, just in the same way that the props and the other references are threaded throughout, the places where Ullman and Keen lived are the settings for the book, so that every element of it is inescapable. You cannot separate the story of the graphic novel from the people who created the original opera. So here we see these terracotta roofs, we see the shape of Terezin itself. Everything is just pushed to the outside limits, right? It's still a sci-fi story. So our walls have to be impossibly tall. Our towers have to be improbably large. Nothing can be exactly normal. So we took Terezin and pushed it and stretched it and expanded it to fit this sort of sci-fi story in it. But we also did research while we were there, and a lot of Terezin is in ill repair. Preservation is really, really good in some aspects, but not in other aspects. There's been some flooding there in the past 2 decades that have been really devastating. This building in particular is an enormous building, but it meant that my photo research for rubble was actually really easy to do. So even the disrepair of the current state of the city kind of got folded into other elements. Terezin, being this fortress city that was built all at once, has these really, really standard architectural details, right? Every building is 3 stories tall. They all have the same elements across them. And these are pretty standard architectural elements. That's not my area of expertise, but you see them around. Nonetheless, we buried them into every building and every opportunity I possibly could, including the wallpaper in young Emperor Overall's bedroom, or the buildings happening in the background. Even the chapter breaks are references to the architecture of Terezin. While we were wandering around, we found this incredibly beautiful badge on the side of a building. It clearly used to have a label or an address. I don't know what it was, but it became, we adapted it and it became the chapter breaks throughout the book. So even some of our paratextual elements hopefully bring people back. Another place we made a reference was to the small fortress, which is the prison just outside of Terezin. This is where Gavrilo Princip was held. Prior to when his health started going down, he died in a hospital elsewhere. But this was where political prisoners were held. This is where a lot of the executions took place. The people who were interred in Terezin were much more afraid of the small fortress than they were of other things that could be happening, right? There's that element of ignorance, things they didn't know. So again, we have a scene where there's a torture taking place. This is unmissable. If you know Terezin, if you've been there, you cannot escape this. Again, it's embedded. The Magdeburg Barracks is the actual barracks that Peter Keen stayed in as somebody who had a job that was very, very useful, doing technical drawings. He drew the currency, the script for the camp. He designed that. So he lived in the Magdeburg Barracks. That's also where they have the art museum now. So this is where the confrontation takes place between our soldier and our worker, where love supplants hate and life begins to take root. And then, of course, we have Emperor Overall's tower, which Dave had found this image of this flak tower. And again, stretching it impossibly, right? Taking the elements and making them totally unwieldy, right? This is architecturally an insane thing to do, to make a giant tower. But we also have this element of the drummer. So we took that top bit and now it becomes a drum. The eye, the roving spotlight that is Overall's eye on everybody all the time is also modeled after a drum. So there are many, many other elements throughout the story. I just want to hand this one over to Dave.
So going back to Magnus Hirschfeld, the soldier has a flashback scene talking about what it was like to be happy as a young man. And for this flashback, we have him walking, with his Lee Chu-song character in front of this very specific building. Now, this was his institute for, essentially sexual studies that he ran and operated and served as a haven for people as well as for researchers. And so we have that in the background. But we also have another image of it being destroyed. This on the right is the image, it's in the U.S. Holocaust Museum archives of the Nazis raiding his library and destroying it. And so you'll see that also referenced in our book as well. And this was really important to us. So I'm going to show you, these are only 10 of what are significantly more books than I could fit on a slide. Every one of these books was written by somebody who helped us along the way. Somebody who was the first one is my creative writing teacher at ASU when I was a young man. Some of these other people are Patrick's colleagues when he was in grad school. We have people who gave us advice, people who gave us guidance. Every single one of these books has been challenged or banned while we were writing this book. Like not before, but like during it, like people we talked to, and then 2 weeks later, their book is ending up on a banned list, is being pulled from shelves. And it's very difficult for us to write a book in a time where this could very well quickly end up on a list, even as we're writing it. And it's terrifying in a way, but also as a reminder of what we are doing today is not that different than what Victor Ullmann and Peter Keen were doing then, by being defiant with our art, even in the face of censorship. With that, I want to move on to talking about how, told you about how we brought the opera to a graphic novel. We were lucky to actually be able to bring it back again. And I'm going to let Adam talk a little bit about that process, and then I'm going to show you a little bit behind the scenes.
So yeah, for our last couple of minutes, as I mentioned earlier, there's a gentleman named Bob Elias, and he actually was the first to introduce me to Patrick and Dave before the graphic novel even came out. I got to check out some early versions of this. I have a dear friend at the Louisville Orchestra who's a wonderful conductor named Teddy Abrams, who was just voted America's top conductor recently. And he's absolutely brilliant, big on social justice, big on cool, big ideas. And a couple of years ago, I told him about this idea. He loved Der Kaiser to begin with, the opera, and we were thinking, like, would it be so cool to make this amazing graphic novel that they did such incredible research about the source material and turn that into a stage production. And I introduced Dave to Teddy, Patrick to Teddy, and long story short, it happened, which is a bit of a small miracle that it did. There were some twists and turns along the way, but the opera was actually premiered with the Louisville Orchestra. And what's also really important about Louisville in particular is that one of the first concertmasters of the Louisville Orchestra actually himself was interned in Terezin as a violinist. And he performed on many pieces there. He survived, and he ended up later on becoming the first violinist, the concertmaster of the Louisville Orchestra. So there's a very distinct historical tie directly to this work as well, too. And now I'm going to let you guys talk about how we turned one thing to another thing, the metamorphosis.
Yeah, Paul Kling, actually. He was the rehearsal violinist for Der Kaiser von Atlantis when he was 15 years old. So that connection was extremely present. If you want to talk about the way that we're living in continuity with history today, you could not find a better illustration. So speaking of illustrations, we did have this incredible production with a team out of the Atlanta Opera who brought an incredible amount of creativity. They put up a scrim, which is a reflective piece of fabric, and it was 2 stories tall. So imagine it the height of this room with the orchestra in front of it, where the images were projected on. And as you manipulated light with the characters in front or behind the screen. You could insert them into the art, which is what we're seeing here. This is the character who plays Life, or the actor who plays Life, inserted in that Life position. We also had 2 other scrims going on, so there was this very multimedia aspect to it. We worked with an amazing animator named Mike Grover to add texture, movement, various real-life elements to the artwork from the graphic novel to just continue enhancing all of those elements, so that as a person who was watching it, maybe who doesn't speak German, they had this visual accompaniment that was directly connected to a story that they could take home with them and live it again and again. So the actual designs for the costumes were also taken from our production. Maybe you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, so it was really amazing for us because we were able to see, not only the artwork go behind them, but the actual, not just the costumes, but the actual performances themselves were modeled after our graphic novel. So here's the singer, portraying Life and doing it as Pierrot. Still in the dialogue, it says Harlequin, because it's harder to change the written dialogue, but you can see that it really, embodies the character overall. One of the more interesting things for me is when we saw Emperor Overall for the first time, and this is from the fitting for the costumes. And this singer, who's, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. Do you remember? But he's performed as Overall many, many times in the past. This is like one of the most experienced performers you can have for this role. But I was really shocked when I saw this costume with the red and the white, because to me, I've only seen it in gray. And the costume designer had to choose colors, and I think it worked marvelously. I was just like really shocked by it. But you can also see the emotion that we put on the page, ending up back in the stage. Here's our drummer, who really did lean into the sex appeal that this character is supposed to have in ways that I would just sort of leave it for you to see the performance in person rather than try to describe it to you. And then and here is our soldier as well, also as an army medic on stage. Our soldier, our rebel, our worker, awesome in terms of like having the jewelry of bullets involved, the sort of griminess of the costume. But the one that I wanted to sort of end with showing you is just seeing the full circle of death here, from Peter Keen's original image to Ezra's early concept designs to Patrick's version to the final version. And as far as I know, this is the only time that Peter Keen's original designs have ended up on stage the way he imagined it. So that makes me really happy to see, like, that is our 6th and 7th panels in his original comic. And I think at this point we have like a 30-second sort of highlight reel from the performance we can show you, and then a 30-second video of like one of the songs. Later this year, or maybe early next year, that we're hoping that there is like a full video that released that we can do maybe screenings of or anything. Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Forgive me if this is mentioned already, but the opera itself was never actually performed in Terezin. Was this mentioned already? No. Okay, this is a very important point. So that's why this is so impressive in the first place as well, too, to see this original version actually realized. When you look at some other productions of Der Kaiser that have been done over the past, since it was like rediscovered in the 70s or so, you never find a reference to the original artwork. And because it was never actually performed in Terezin, Peter Keen effectively probably never saw it himself. We don't know exactly why it wasn't performed, most likely because of there might have been censorship, as was mentioned, but we don't know the full reason. So that's why this is also just so impactful that they put it into a graphic novel, and then finally we got it onto stage that actually really honors the original vision of the librettist and illustrator. And I think with that, we should probably go to the clips.
Yep,
I'm scared of technology.
Yeah, no, so I believe I am going to be hitting unmute at this point. All right. And I'm waiting for a nod here.
Der Kaiser von Atlantis. 5, 6, 7, Leben noch 1900
Nichts kann brechen, nichts kann senken. Nichts kann brechen.
Im Namen eurer großen Zukunft.
Was machst du da?
Der Kaiser.
And so I think we can take some questions, or concerns. At this point, I'm looking to other people to jump in who are organizing this and help us out. I'm gonna go back to.
There. Hi, everyone. Okay, so if anyone has questions, raise your hand and I'll bring you. Zoom can hear the questions in the room. The boss gets first.
Is it okay if I pop this
So
mic
I
out?
actually need all three of you because I'm going to ask a question. Try to make sense of what we've just. Thank you, first of all, for a very intriguing and complex piece of work on so many levels. So here's my question. It's about art. I'll start with you, Adam. So in Theresienstadt, what do you think Victor Ullmann and Peter Keen were trying to affect in terms of the role of art? Is it
Sorry, say again.
what those two creators, the composer and the librettist, what are they trying to produce? What are they trying to affect? What is the role of art for the inmates in Theresienstadt?
Well, I think for
But wait a second. The question for you is, what are you trying to do in your art? It seems to me that you're actually doing really science fiction. It is indeed about dystopia. But was it about dystopia in Theresienstadt?
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it was a critique, I do believe, of, although they weren't fully aware, of course, of the immensity of what was going on in the Holocaust as it were. They were, of course, affected not only by World War I, but then also their current situation in World War II, and these Kaiser Wilhelm figures, these Adolf Hitler figures that consumed their whole lives and resulted in their ultimate demise. They were very aware of that, and that sort of suffering that they experienced both physically and also existentially, I think really comes across in this work because it's a farce and it is dystopian, and it's a critique of fascism, which is very clear, and I think that was a way for them to sort of exercise their feelings about such things in the moment. There were other examples of art that was going on in Theresienstadt that was purely for pleasure, when you had, Gideon Klein, even different people performing more standard works or writing pieces that were less evocative of the sort of the intensity of the moment and rather just to escape. But I don't think that this was a work of escapism, but it was rather just a really evocative representation of their inner and literal turmoil that they were experiencing.
So I agree with everything Adam said. I mean, I do think that we did not invent these science fiction elements. They were there. They were there. We just helped illustrate them. I feel like that possibly part of this was a coping mechanism, that when you feel powerless, art can help you feel empowered. But in its sense, this is a kidney punch from them to their imprison, people imprisoning them, and just totalitarians over the course of history. For me, discovering the Music Survives collection, and in particular this work, really actually did change me and how I view the world, and set me on a path where my career has taken me through journalism, where I do issues related to prisoners' rights. Currently, for the last 12 years or so, I've worked for an organization where I advocate on issues related to police surveillance and censorship issues. This changed me. And so putting together this book, I want people to, take away the same things I took away from it. And if there's one or two kids who read it and then become as inspired as I did, that's like the ultimate like awesomeness. But, I think the best compliment we get on this, and I think, Patrick, you agree on this, is when people read this, they often like come to it and they're like, I was expecting Maass, this really dark graphic novel about Art Spiegelman's father. Like, I was expecting Maass. It's funnier than I thought it would be. That is the feedback I was looking back, because it is freaking funny. These two men, in the face of like essentially certain doom, found things to laugh about. And that to me also is worth celebrating.
Yeah, to continue the tradition of answering both questions. When, and this is an interpretation, right? My interpretation, having read the text, and especially having visited Terezin, is that this piece it's about indignation and the rage of having your life interrupted. The experience at Terezin was very particular. It is not quite the same as other camps. And so there is a sense to which, in our researches, many people were trying to recreate the normalcy of their life. They were making art because that's what they did. They were forming clubs. They were trying to run shops. They were trying to teen magazine. There's a teen magazine. There's a Brundabar, obviously. There's a sense to which like their whole lives had been put on hold. And the themes of this particular piece about days that no longer have meaning and repeat again and again and again. One of the final lines of the opera is, don't take death's name in vain. There's a call in a sort of a dark way for a more meaningful death than this sort of living hold on being able to produce anything or have autonomy in your own life. And so when I have read it, as we researched it, that's one of the things that has really like stuck to me. And so when I say, this isn't about, and I think if you get the opportunity to read it, one of the things you'll find is it doesn't have a dour ending. Actually, death is it's a blessing. It's a way to return to a life that's normal. It's surprisingly uplifting. It's enraging. It should be, because what I would hope, what we hope we're doing, is that when you read it, you feel that fury and that rage and that indignation, which was so well earned, but also that you see all the things they could not know, and the humanity and the place that they held in that moment, and the way that it reflects on our current moments, as it always does.
Wow, you guessed it. Well, I have a quick, oh, sorry about that. Well, I have a quirky question. We spoke about Art Spiegelman, we spoke about Maass, and we discussed this during the the conference earlier, and we talked about how when Spiegelman got the Pulitzer, he got the prize in the fiction section, and he was very upset about it. And there was a New Yorker article published thereafter that that basically was based on an interview with him, and he said, well, there should be a new category for me, and he said it's nonfiction / Maass. So what would be yours?
Yeah, you answered that, because I'll start talking about comics.
Well, what I try to emphasize on people in general is that this is not a true story. You're not opening this to get a history of the Holocaust. You're getting a story here, and you're getting a fantasy science fiction zombie story that happens to be based on this. It's kind of like a mundane, not satisfying answer, but like there's often a category for adapted from another medium, and that's our category for those types of things.
I can keep it concise. Part of the problem that Art Spiegelman was facing, and one of the things that we'll inevitably face with graphic novels and comics, is that they're treated like they are themselves a genre, but they're not. They're a medium. And within the medium, you can tell any kind of story you want. So the assumption is that, oh, it's a comic, therefore it must be fiction, right? That's what Art Spiegelman faces, when it's very much not. This, however, is a piece of fiction, for sure.
And in the musical world, this turned out very cool to produce because oftentimes when this has been represented in the past, it's been so esoteric or so bare bones that the libretto, which is the script essentially itself, becomes very inaccessible. But what's so gratifying about this production is the fact that they use the medium of a graphic novel to so effectively depict this fable, this tale, if you will, this character, that it then comes across as an operatic medium very effectively, where people in the audience actually understand what the heck is going on. So watching my language, excuse me. And so in the artistic sense, for opera's purposes, which I don't think you were asking about opera, but I'm sorry, but I must step in. It was great for that, yeah.
The next question is from David Cater, and it's from online. He wanted to know if there is any sort of a recording of the opera, or even a video or a YouTube or something, so that he could see the whole thing.
So of this production, not yet. It's coming. There are, several different recordings on Spotify and various mediums. There are various, full versions of the opera performed by various other entities. Do you have a favorite one to promote?
I will say, if you want to see an example of like one of those slightly more esoteric ones, which is not a knock, it just is what it is, the Rice version from over the pandemic, where they couldn't hold an actual performance, and so they did a lot of digital work. That's a good example of how you can take this, what direction you can take it in.
Piggyback on that really quick. This opera became very popular to produce during the pandemic because it's a chamber opera. It only requires 6 singers and 13 players. And that's what happened at Rice. They used a green screen, and you could effectively do it remotely. So all of a sudden, there was I wouldn't call it a surge in popularity, but there was an increase in production of this opera that could be easily socially distanced. And some of these are actually readily available on YouTube. But this wonderful one that we did in Louisville will be available hopefully sometime in the very near future. And by near future in classical music terms, I mean like a year probably.
So I know a lot of the art that was created in Terezin by children was saved in suitcases by Friedel Dicker Brandeis. Were what you showed us, some of the original, was that also preserved in the attics in suitcases, or where did you find this?
So it depends on which piece we're talking about, which artifact we're talking about, but there is a suitcase full of like a whole bunch of Peter Keen's art from even when he, some of his stuff from as a kid was found elsewhere, but so the stuff from Terezin was in the possession of his girlfriend who survived the war. But yeah, in a suitcase, and that has its own incredible story worthy of a film, because that one, like the suitcase made it with her to the U.S. and then during the time in the Czech Republic, they asked her to bring it back so they could index it. Then they seized it from her, and then her nephew had to smuggle certain pieces out of the country, and now it's sitting in Terezin under disputed ownership. It's a whole dramatic thing. But yeah, it's essentially that sort of thing. The opera score itself also has, and we describe it in the back of our book, the musicologist who has custody of it at Paul Sacher Stiftung describes the process that it came into the Paul Sacher Stiftung's possession, and that one involved Victor Ullmann handing it over to the librarian, who handed it over to this other guy, Dr. Adler, who took it to London, and it sat in his attic for years, and then he gave it to this other guy, and and then it ended up in this like wild facility in it's called the Goetheanum. It's the sort of Mecca facility of the Anthroposophy movement. If you're familiar with the Waldorf School and Rudolf Steiner, like it's a whole spiritualist movement. But there's this wild, giant, like otherworldly castle in Dornach, Switzerland. And they thought that since Victor Ullmann was really into anthroposophy, that they should give it to them. And then they were like, we don't know how to preserve like Holocaust era scores. And so they gave it to the Paul Sacher Stiftung.
Hi, this question is for Adam. I think you may have answered it already, but is the original score and orchestration, was that used in the Louisville performance?
So what we have, there's a version by Shot Publishing that we utilize that also has a libretto. Louisville added more string players than the original 13 members or whatever it usually is. So they had a bit of a buffed up performance of it. So Louisville increased their numbers, but there are times when it's just super reduced. And there's also some bizarre instruments, supposedly like harpsichord and banjo and stuff like that too. They could kind of utilize whatever they got their hands on.
Thank you.
Thank you for this. This is really inspiring, all the different layers that you were able to put. To me, this story seems incredibly human, like the absurdity of life and death as almost losing its distinction through exhaustion, living in a kind of in a totalitarian repression wherein those two categories have sort of lost their distinctiveness in a way. And but to me, this story seems just incredibly human. And I'm wondering that, but the writers are Jewish, the performers were Jewish. Every aspect of it was kind of put together by Jews in a distinctively Jewish scenario in a way. So I'm wondering if in the process of this, did you come by anything that felt to you as distinctively Jewish about this story, about this dystopia? I mean, in a way, you worked Magnus Hirschfeld into this, and so there's almost like there's a Jew in that sense.
That's a difficult one because when we went to Prague and we did various tours of I mean they have like a it's Prague is famous in Jewish history as being like that's where the golem is from, right? Like that's the big story of Prague, and you find little golem trinkets everywhere. But we had a tour guide who was Jewish who was actually telling us that like Czech Jews really weren't very practicing. They were fully 100% integrated into the community. And perhaps ironically, the Nazis coming in, like forcibly connected them with their Judaism in the same way that we talked about Victor Ullmann, who, had basically abandoned for anthroposophy, this, spiritualist movement, and had totally come separated. But, there is nothing, very little or for nothing at all that I encountered in the opera itself that really is tied to Judaism. In fact, there is like some like Lutheran music involved in it as well. It really seems like it was possibly written by Victor Ullmann and Peter Keen with the idea that this is something that should have a larger audience, and that might be part of it. Now, that said, we did come across a lot of interesting, Jewish things in this whole process, but not necessarily, intrinsic to the story.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on that and agree. This is actually like the case of, I'm making a generalization, but in the case of many of these, what we would call recovered voices composers, many of them were fully assimilated Jews for the most part, Victor Ullmann being no exception to that. And in his musical writing, again, it wasn't until that he actually went to Terezin and he actually encountered more religious Jews that he then started to embody some Jewish elements into music that he was writing. He didn't do that before being in Terezin, but in this opera in particular, they actually do a version of Deutschland über alles in it in a minor key. They quote an Angel of Death theme by Smetana, I believe. And then, yeah, there's also a quote from a Lutheran hymn at the end. So if anything, it's not Jewish at all in that respect, unless there's some Judaism in the satire, perhaps. I don't know. That's a Jewish quality. That would be a Jewish quality, I guess. But there's satire in other places as well too. But yeah, this was the case of many of these composers. And that's all.
It seems like the amount of work that you all put in here is a lot, and that you traveled and did a lot of research and all of that in order to get not only the opera but the book together. I'm just wondering, did you all just do this? Was this a labor of love? Did you get grants? Like, how did you, like, it seems like this would have been really expensive to make happen.
Yeah, so this was started off as a labor of love, but we actually got very, very lucky in that, I set about this process of, let's do this the right way. And, I spent a lot of money out of pocket trying to hire Patrick and, to do the stuff that we needed to put together, what's called a pitch packet, like this document of like sample pages, what the story is going to look like, what the comparable titles are for it. And we got an agent, and that agent helped us pitch it to who might be like the best editor in all of comics. Her name is Karen Berger. In the 90s, she ran this line for DC called Vertigo that published, so many comics that became huge and fundamentally changing, like V for Vendetta and Y the Last Man and Preacher. And if you know these, you might know them from TV shows that have been made in the last 10 years, like huge number of TV shows and movies. And she has her own little, what's called an imprint, a subsection of one of the major comics publishers, Dark Horse. And she gets to choose what she wants to do, how long it's going to take, how she wants to do it, and she picked up our book. Like, we sent it to a whole bunch of different people. We sent it to her on just like a long shot Hail Mary. Like, of course, like Karen Berger's not going to take this. She's got a lot of stuff on her plate. She's got other things she's interested in. But she took it, and she was able to help us to like not only get it published, but get it published exactly the way we wanted to. And so that's why it's like got a nice hard cover on it, which we didn't even know it was going to be a hard cover until they told us it was going to be a soft cover. Then my mom emails me and she's like, I thought you said it was going to be a soft cover. On Amazon, it says it's a hard cover. And I had to call her up and say like, hey, Karen, is this wrong? And she's like, oh, no, we decided this was worth doing it like much nicer. And so, that's kind of how it is. And so, being picked up by Dark Horse meant we got exactly the kind of support we needed to take this all the way.
Right.
Oh, do you want to say something?
Speaking of labors of love, if you ever come across the Czech language version of it, that's a true labor of love. It is beautiful. Dust jacket, ribbon to keep your place. It is gorgeous.
That they just published for the love of comics and believing that this should exist in the Czech Republic. But it's it is what it is. But even the little like onomatopoeia that you barely even see, like they translated that into Czech onomatopoeia.
And then on a musical standpoint, the Louisville Orchestra was gracious enough to accept this project and to fund it and to make it happen. And now also bringing in the director of the Atlanta Opera, Tomer Zvolun, to direct it with his team and wonderful costume designers. And what we're doing now is we're hoping to package it, because as far as operas, there's a very famous quote, which starts, the two most expensive things in the world are opera and war. And war. And as far as operas go, this is a reasonably affordable one. So we're hoping to be able to package it and get it out there to a lot of different companies and orchestras and different places, so the story and their interpretation of it also can be heard and seen by many.
Okay, this is a long one, so it's from online, so I'm just going to read it, and then we'll end with the last question from the room. Okay, so this is from Amelia, excuse me, I'm going to mess up your last name, Begovic. As a professor and someone who researches how contemporary generations consume the past, I find the comic medium and other experiential representations to be key to conveying the past. In other words, students are more likely to read a comic than to dig through archival material, listen to survivor testimony, read history books, see an opera even. Have you found that a comic or even a video game can provide an essential transferential space for new generations to enter into the past?
I'm going to let you start with this one, Patrick.
And then there's more. Start with that.
Easy answer is yes.
Short answer. All right. Yeah.
No, 100%. Comics as a medium, first and foremost, are constantly growing in sophistication and the breadth of the kind of stories that they can tell. It's one of the conversations that I have a lot with a lot of my friends and colleagues are absolutely history nuts, and we're always trying to figure out how to do history in comics. It's a difficult thing to do, because you have to grapple with truth and representation. When you draw a picture, did you actually show somebody what it looked like, or did you show them your drawing of what it looked like? which is pretty philosophical, but nuts and bolts. Yeah, absolutely. Students engage with images and words, and I think they're trained more and more every day to engage with images and words. This is how we see the world, especially when you are young, as this combination, which is incredibly information dense and extremely efficient. All the things I would need to write to describe this room in prose, I could do in a single image. And you would know that this guy was hungry and that guy was, here. I don't know. I didn't want to ascribe. I didn't want to ascribe a adjective to you that didn't belong. I should have picked a random person and been like, that person's bored. But no, like it's just incredibly information dense. And so teaching students how to interpret that information accurately becomes really important if you're going to put such hefty and important information into it. But even if you don't get to that level, they really understand it very intuitively.
I would also say that, when I think about, like my Holocaust education when I was a youth, I distinctly remember a, rabbi in Sunday school having us do an activity where we all had to decide, like we're given a bunch of cards and decide who had to be, sent to Auschwitz. And that was like a game they had us play to like show how difficult it was for Jewish councils to have to deal with each other and the horror of Nazis making Jews do this to each other. I remember Anne Frank. That's like the perennial thing. But I think there was a shift in the 90s where suddenly it was like, well, we're going to move away from certain literature and move into, Schindler's List and Life is Beautiful. And that's what we're going to do for a bit with education is like move on to movies. What I think is interesting about graphic novels is that there's this huge resurgence recently, first of all, because of like manga, and so many kids are getting into manga, Japanese comics as a very big thing. But then comics itself has gone from like this thing that nerds did to suddenly the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the end all of like pop culture, and everybody's wearing Spider-Man and all the time. And so that also helps that more and more youth are not only interested in the medium, but already accept that comics are American culture or culture in general.
The other half of the question was why black and white?
So a couple of main reasons. I'll just do this quickly. One is that we felt that was appropriate, that it gave across the sort of like minimal resources that they would have had at their disposal. I mean, Peter Keane did have color from time to time that he was able to do some watercolors with, but most of his stuff is black and white. We felt it would give that dimension of duality, black and white, and some gray in between, that itself was a visual metaphor. Also, it's just like a lot more economical to do a black and white book. And especially on the timeline we were on, it would have been a much longer process to do color, and probably would have involved a whole other several members of our team to make that happen.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's a style that I had been working in. And when we were doing all the prep work to get pitches out, it just seemed perfect, right? Because you could have all of this ink wash draped over the page with sort of these fantastic images coming out of it. So black and white, it's thematically appropriate, I think. And
there was literally never a moment where it was like, hey, should we do this in color? Like never a second. Like I had already, by the time I contacted Patrick and Ezra, I was like, this is a black and white book.
But that moment did come when we talked to the director of the Atlanta Opera, and they wanted to change the slides potentially to color. And that was another discussion that was had, and then ended up settling on doing things in black and white. And the costumes were not great. It's black and white. They were in color, but there were different elements that they wanted to actually utilize, like the cover of the book, which is in color, and maybe try to have that. That became a whole nother discussion with projections and stuff too. So yeah, there's no black and white answer to the black and white question, but maybe you got it.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief in my question. At the risk of seeming ungrateful, is there any talk about creating something such as a short film from what you have created in the book? I think it would be magnificent.
Currently, no. I think we're contractually open to that possibility, although I think largely to honor the original work. I- I'll speak personally. Personally, I think I don't need to see this graphic novel become a film. If this opera became a film, then that would make a lot of sense to me. And if the graphic novel is the vehicle for that, then that would be beautiful. But to the best of my knowledge, no, we haven't had a producer send us a message or anything.
Yeah, I would say there's also some challenges in that the opera itself runs 50 minutes. Our book can be read in 45 minutes. You don't see a lot of 50-minute theatrical releases, and so that makes it a bit difficult. However, to satisfy you, there is a documentary film about the Emperor of Atlantis called The Emperor of Atlantis that's currently has been on the film festival circuit for 2 years. I don't think it's been released in any TV station, but when it does, it is a very good, very interesting, controversial. It makes me have some like personal issues with how some other people have treated the opera over the years, but it's nevertheless a very, very well done documentary about the process of like how it was originally created, how it was rediscovered and adapted, and then follows a modern production bringing it together. And so it's a very competently and interesting and beautifully shot documentary that hopefully people will see eventually.
Let's thank this wonderful trio for bringing this incredible piece of art to life.